Welcome to a conversation. Our guest today is Jean Fairbairn. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you for inviting me to join you.
You're welcome. Yes. Now, when I first came into your office, there was a very beautiful vibe, and it reminded me of a quote of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and the quote is, "The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep love and concern. Beautiful people do not just happen." When I went, into your office, you don't see your students as people with a disability, but, as regular people. So could you elaborate on your philosophy and what you do?
Sure. Actually, I think I see people, all of us in this world have disabilities of one kind or another. We have strengths, we have limitations, and we have challenges. But students with disabilities are just that. They're students first, and they happen to have disabilities, just like the rest of us with disabilities. My disability is a piece of who I am. It's not how I define myself entirely. And while it may be a pain in the neck in some ways, in other ways it's helped me to become who I am. So I think it took me some time as I grew up and developed. I wanted to be okay and valued in spite of my disability. And as I went along and became comfortable in my own skin, I guess,
Yes.
with society, which sometimes makes that difficult,
Yeah.
I remember saying to a minister of mine that I want to be valued in spite of. And he said, well, we don't value you because of it or in spite of it. We value you for all you are. And that's what I want students to take in, that what we all want to do is value and appreciate each other for all of who we are.
Now, for our viewers, what is your story, and how has your progression given you the strength and the grace to help other students?
Well, I was born with a disability, obviously, with
Yes.
dwarfism, and my parents, from the get-go, were very much, you can do anything you want to do. So they really didn't coddle me, but they certainly defended my rights. So I was in an integrated school, just with everybody else. I grew up in Long Island, Roslyn, Long Island, and I also grew up in what was a very largely predominantly Jewish neighborhood, and I happened to be Presbyterian, so we were sort of a minority, but it was in the 50s, and people were very much into defender of the underdog. So I think that community really rallied on that note with me as well. When I was going from junior high into high school, the administration was saying, well, I think she should go to a special school, she might get hurt. And my father, who was an airline pilot, was home during the day. So they went, and they were not having any of that.
Oh, wow.
And somebody was saying, well, I know what it's like. And he said, look, I'm not raising a cripple, I'm raising a daughter. If she gets hurt, she gets hurt. And my doctors had said things like, we can fix broken bones. It's harder to fix a broken spirit. So everything, I did stay within the public school.
Yeah.
And certainly there were challenges as I moved into the teenage years. I think probably everybody experiences those challenges anyway,
Yes. Yeah.
in terms of where do I stand now, in terms of men and women, and some of my friends were probably seeing me as a liability, looking for guys. So we all have our times of sorrow and feelings of insecurity. But I always felt very much affirmed by my family and by the people around me. And continued, I wanted to be a lawyer at the time, to be the defender again of the underdog.
Yeah.
Very long ago there was a TV show called Perry Mason, and Perry Mason was the defender of all the people that couldn't defend themselves. So that's what I thought I wanted to do.
Yeah.
When I got to college, I realized a lot of the legal work was behind the doors and doing the research. So I realized I didn't want to do that.
Okay.
And ended up in counseling. Then people would say to me, oh, you'd be so good working with people with disabilities. And again, my response at the time was, I can work with anybody.
Yeah.
Don't slot me. But as I continued to look at graduate programs, went to West Virginia, interviewed to be a school counselor, trainee, if you will. And they said, well, you can be in the school counseling program, but the rehab counseling program is free, and we'll give you a stipend to live on. Oh, I said, I can work with people with disabilities.
Yeah.
So moved into that, and certainly we're all, as I said, we are all the same.
Yeah.
So it's not, I think what has always helped me to move forward and to feel good about myself and compassionate about for other people
Yeah.
is to recognize and have experienced that discrimination, not necessarily in saying you're not allowed to do this,
Yeah.
but some social discrimination, like would you be happier with your kind, whatever that is, you know, people like you, and moving through that to a sense of self-confidence and a sense of wanting other people to feel that self-confidence in themselves as well.
You hit on a key concept. You know, some argue the way your dad fought for you to stay in a regular school. And, you know, when you look at the educational system, one can argue that it's one of divide and conquer. It's one of, depending on how you test, depending on your behavior,
Right.
You get put on special ed, remedial, regents, honors, or advanced placement, and how we compartmentalize students based on our expectations. And life can change at any moment.
Sure it can.
And one could argue that in order to be the best person you can, you have to be with people who are smarter, who have other things to offer. So would you suggest, or in your experience, that perhaps we should focus more on integrating people with disabilities instead of shunning them to the side?
Certainly, and I think that has been the progress in the public schools in many ways. That diversity, we all are different. We're all unique and we're all similar, and we learn and grow from being able to help one another in different ways, being challenged to be better. So I definitely feel that the movement in integration in the lower levels as well has been a positive influence. In the 39 years that I've been in this position, I've seen the growth in the number of students, dramatic growth. There were 18 students when I first came here that were I self-identified. Now it's 640. And it's because students have had better preparation in the lower grades. So they're not being shunned aside or and not given the opportunities to develop. Once they come to this level, there's no special admission, and they really have to get in on their own merits and their own abilities. But at that point, what I think is critical and not always there in some of the lower grades is not just providing inclusiveness, but also then helping people to become responsible for themselves, know about their strengths, know about the struggles they have, be prepared to be resourceful, and not just expecting everybody to kind of make it all go away or make it easy. For people with and without disabilities, I think we have to see ourselves as independent and dependent upon one another. I mean, we're really interdependent in this world.
And in a sense, you know, college is a time of, you know, experimentation. It's a time where, you know, young adults, you know, grow into adulthood.
Right.
And with that, you know, there's certain psychological challenges. And how do you go about identifying somebody with a disability? Because often we perceive disabilities in the physical sense of, you know, you're missing a leg or, you know, you're a certain size. But, you know, disabilities of the mind, given the stigmas in not only being disabled, but also in the mental health aspect, you work with both those who are physically disabled and also mentally impaired in some way.
Well, we do work with students who have either physical or psychological disabilities, learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder. We're very clear on trying to use language to normalize things as well. So, I mean, like a disabled car doesn't work. So we don't say disabled students. Do I slip occasionally? Does somebody else slip occasionally? Sure. We don't want to paralyze ourselves in terms of language. But I think what we're looking at is we all have challenges from time to time, and what do we do to work with them? So the students who self-identify themselves to us, actually 2/3 of them have non-visible disabilities, things you don't see. Again, it can be health, it can be hearing, it can be a learning disability, ADD, autism spectrum, psychological, traumatic brain injury, any number of things. But what we're helping folks to see is that you are still response-able, if you will.
Okay.
Not just responsible, but response-able for yourself. And look at disability with a big A and a
Yes.
little d.
Yeah.
So that we want to be open to folks who need our support. At the same time, I'm not really a proponent of avoiding the language. Years ago, I heard of a group called the Inconvenienced Sportsmen's Association. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It's a disability. It's a disability.
Yeah.
I'm not disabled, no, but I do have a disability.
Yeah.
And it's owning it, but also not defining ourselves by it.
Now, in your 39 years in
Yeah.
working, what has been your trajectory? Are you encouraged with the growth that has happened? Or, of course, there's still more that could be done.
Sure.
But what are some of the things you would like to see in the future? And what are some milestones that you believe have been achieved?
Okay. Well, we've come a long way. And I really like to embrace the civil rights motto. We ain't where we want to be, we ain't where we're going to be, but thank God we ain't where we used to be. Because I think that we have come, when we had 18 students and hardly anybody coming here, at least with recognized disabilities. Physically, we've put a lot of automatic doors on. When I first came here, they did have the OCC transport lift service. They were sort of the pioneers of that. And my position was on a grant. In 1988, after being here for 11 years, it became institutionalized. So that was a positive, obviously, the university taking that responsibility on. We've seen a lot of growth in people's awareness and understanding that a learning disability doesn't mean you're not bright and that you can't be successful. Many years ago, some would say, well, we don't have any students with learning disabilities here. And now they realize, of course we did, and we do. They just learn differently. So I've seen a lot of changes. We've grown in our staffing, thankfully. When I first came, it was me and a half-time secretary. Now we have myself, an assistant director, who is also a learning disability specialist. We have an adaptive technology specialist, an assistant to the director, who is really like another assistant director, a secretary. We hire note takers for students. We have a graduate assistant. So we've certainly expanded with the need. And so I've seen not only our capability to support students expanding, but one thing that we had years ago, and we still have in spite of the growth of this place, is a sense of community. And that's what's important to hold on to. I think as we move forward, we need to see that access, number one, is not something to think about as a nicety. It's a civil right. It's part of lights and heat and everything else that we do. It doesn't mean special standards and special perks. But it does mean respect and appreciation for who we all are together and what we bring to this campus. So we continue to go that way. Vice President Rose is such a support. I've had many vice presidents, or several vice presidents, and they've all been supportive. But Brian Rose gets it. And President Stenger also. He's been very supportive in terms of moving forward, not just kind of acknowledging that you're here and going, yeah, we like you, but really helping us to advance, helping students to be recognized for what they do, and to have opportunities to do more.
Now, you raised a very interesting point before, in the sense that finding different ways for students to learn, and there's been a growing need for schools to be more creative. In a sense that most students can't sit in a chair and be fed facts and information, and that certain students, perhaps if they fidget or if they move, You know, they might be diagnosed with something, something that perhaps could be easily remedied by more activity, or something like your programs, in a sense of giving them alternatives and seeing that people learn different ways. So do you think, obviously, you in your program, you have different softwares and systems to help students learn?
We do have a variety of assistive software, or adaptive software, speech to text, text to speech, Zoom text, things like that. But we're also moving and working with faculty and the Center for Learning and Teaching in promoting universal design. When I first heard the words universal design in terms of academics, you know, I was like, what do you mean, dumbing it down? You know, and I think that's what faculty sometimes hear initially, and that's not what it's about. It's what you just said, you know, helping people to have a variety of ways of taking in the information and a variety of ways of giving it back. It doesn't mean that you don't learn to write, whether it's writing through dictation or writing through your hands. I do think people need to be able to express themselves in writing. And personal face-to-face communication, whether it's a sign language interpreter, whether it's computer-aided real-time transcription, whether it's speaking. But at the same time, let's not just say, well, it's always been done this way. So thinking outside the box. And we have a campus that certainly has a lot of people that can do that. So we need to make sure we don't get ourselves, with the increased workload, get stuck in silos. We really still need to recognize that we're a community and help each other, students with students, students with faculty, faculty with staff, back and forth with that. SA, an opportunity for us to work with the Student Association to not only have them provide us with input, but also help the Student Association to say, okay, how can we make ourselves more universally accessible rather than, oh, now what do? We have a student with this, or we have a student with that disability.
Yeah, and speaking of disability, I had an experience with a professor who was one of my guests, and it slipped my consciousness that, you know, perhaps he might need to have a little elevated step. And, you know, how do we create more awareness, you know? And often, sometimes we forget, you know, as students, especially when you're my age and, you know, you might think you're invincible or you just don't have the sensitivity or it skips your mind. How can we engrave the fact that we need more, let's say, elevator lifts, we need more steps for individuals?
Well, I think the more people that we have here with disabilities, the more visible it becomes, number one. I think we have to be deliberate about some of the things that we do rather than, oh, we'll get to it one of these days. Disability awareness, meaning disability awareness, is really critical in many ways. We used to do a lot of that, and then when we had more and more students to serve, it kind of fell by the by. So I believe that the more we can come together, even with the student organizations, to say, okay, if we're going to get a speaker, maybe can we find a speaker that speaks to both issues? Or somebody who has a disability and has something to say about being an African American, or simply faculty and staff. Recruitment, you know, making sure that diversity includes disability. Frequently people would say, well, of course it's in there. And I'll say, well, if you don't say it, it's not in there. Because, you know, as you said, we forget and we don't think about it. On the other side of that, the flip side is that I think that we all have to be aware of disability isn't just disability. It's disability. People have different backgrounds. Their backgrounds, their ethnicity, the way they grew up affects how they view themselves and others with disabilities. So through coursework, I think that would not necessarily just a course on disability, but if we have an opportunity, and you know, I say this as I'm beginning to retire, or graduate as I like to call it.
Transition.
Right. Faculty, if we make a deliberate decision to spend a little time doing research to expand what we're doing so that maybe, do they ever talk about Stephen Hawkins?
Mm.
As not, and as a disabled physicist, no, as a physicist
Yeah.
who is overcoming so many other issues. Actors, actresses with disabilities of one kind or another.
Mm-hmm.
Not to separate them out,
Yeah.
but to say this is one more piece of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Because it helps us to, well, I say I don't define myself as by my disability.
Yeah.
It's not something that I disregard or disrespect either.
Yeah, and that the theme of creating a community, of
Mhm.
course, starts with a conversation.
Yes.
And this conversation, you need different voices and different speakers as well. And next week, a speaker is coming to do training with you.
Yes, she
so,
is.
So could you tell our viewers about that?
Yes, Dr. Jane Jarrow is actually an expert in higher education and disability, and somewhat the law revolved around that as well. She was the first executive director of the National Association on Higher Education and Disability, which has been in existence for about 38 years. I was one of the first members there, and she has her own company now. So we've invited her to come to campus and do some specific reminder training, if you will, and some awareness for different groups, particularly faculty and staff, so that they understand what their responsibilities are. It's not so much a disability awareness, touchy-feely, emotional kind of thing, although those are valuable. But this is really, we're talking about equal rights.
Yeah.
We're not talking about if we have a little extra money left over. We're not talking about what are they going to do when they get out into the work world. We want to be cognizant of that, certainly. But this is an artificial environment.
Yeah.
A test is a 1-hour thing. If someone needs extended time, that doesn't mean they can't do the job in the work world. So she's going to be addressing a number of things. We may touch on, although we don't want to spend a lot of time, on service animals and emotional support animals. Service animals are a legal right for people who need them. And the only question someone can ask of a person is this animal, which is a dog, basically it's a dog or a miniature horse, is this dog a service animal for someone with a disability, yourself? And if so, what task do they perform?
I've also seen cats. One of my coworkers has a cat. I guess it's a comfort cat.
Yes, either a comfort cat or emotional support cat. I love cats. I have them. I'm not sure you can train them to be a service animal. They have minds of their own. If they feel like it, they'll do it.
Yeah.
But emotional support animals can be actually any type of animal with the exception of reptiles and monkeys right now. And that's different than a service animal. An emotional support animal is an accommodation. It's covered under the Housing and Urban Development Law, so it's housing. And it's like any other accommodation. So someone would have to come and show us why that's necessary, and what they plan to have, the animal they plan to have, why they need that animal, and then that would be, if that was an appropriate accommodation, that would be approved. The service animal, you don't go through an application, and in none of those do they have to have certification, if you will, from some other place. You can train your own animals.
Now, in terms of accommodation, I've had friends who suffer from a mental illness, whether it's anxiety or ADHD, and certain times they can't get an assignment done, and they don't know where to turn. So for a student who's suffering with like a mental illness or just stress in general, could they come to your office and perhaps appeal and have more time for an exam or have more time for homework?
If someone's got a documented disability, they certainly can come and talk to us about accommodations. I mean, the first thing I do say to people is that we all have test anxiety. You know, so test anxiety is not a disability.
Mhm.
But if it's a pervasive anxiety or something that, a performance anxiety that is to the point that you come into a test and you shut down because you just can't do anything, that could be a very severe anxiety disorder. ADHD, we don't really classify it as mental illness, but it's disability of its own. That sometimes, certainly, people take mental breaks, or they do need some extended time. And the purpose of that is, again, not to ensure that someone finish the test or to give them an edge. It's so that we're not testing that. We're trying to test what they know. So it's to equalize the playing field. So they can certainly come, and we have seen more students with non-visible disabilities. At the same time, become as resourceful as they can. Some disabilities are not going to change. Some disabilities will never go away, but the way people manage them will change. So, and ideally, we all want to be as unlimited as we can be. At the same time, we don't want to be disrespected because of a disability. So yes, students certainly can come to us if they feel they have a disability that is getting in their way and they need an accommodation.
Yeah, and also just to, you know, survive, you said, you know, we all have disabilities in one sense or another. And to really go through the struggle that is life at times. What I find interesting is that you minister on occasion, and not focusing on religion in general, but just on positive energy, on positive thinking. How does one really have a thick skin, in a sense, and to keep on moving on despite whatever may happen?
Well, I mean, thick skin is part of it, I think, but I think most of it is the belief, and it's hard for people who haven't grown up with that, but the belief that you are worthy. That regardless of what faith you have, or that you believe that you were placed on this earth for a purpose, positive purpose. And that, you know, in the end, it doesn't matter when we die, and as I say, you can't take your toys with you. What we've developed, what we've accomplished, how smart we were, is not going to be as important about how much we cared and loved one another. So I really believe that focusing on the phrase that, yes, you are worthy, and that there are times that we will all experience what we feel is injustice. Everybody feels that at some point. And being able to not let it define us, but also hear what is being said, because I think we can sometimes hear something that really wasn't meant to be discriminatory at all, but because of my experiences, I hear it that way. So it's believing in, I have to say, a loving God. I mean, I really, regardless of what faith people have or don't have, I do believe in a loving God who created each one of us, placed us here, believes in us, and wants us to love God and love one another in active ways.
Wow. Well, thank you. You've been a fabulous guest, and thank you for your 39 years of service to Binghamton. You will be missed.